Hi Noteboard Gamers and welcome back to Noteboard Gaming. I'm your host, I'm Mark. Now in today's video we are going to be reviewing Weather Machine, the latest game from Vital Lacerda, published by Eagle-Gryphon Games with the wonderful artwork by Ian O'Toole. More specifically, we're going to be overviewing and reviewing the solo mode for Weather Machine. Now I will say I'm not going to go into a deep rules explanation on this because the rules are relatively long and complex, so it's just going to be an overview of how the solo mode works and my thoughts on the back end of it. So Weather Machine launched on Kickstarter last year and is due to be delivered to backers, I think, in kind of November, December time. I was given a review copy when I went over to Essen this year and I met up with Randall from Eagle-Gryphon Games, so I was given a review copy along with the wonderful metal cogs, machine part components that you can get, and I believe backers are going to get those as well. Now some people have received an early copy of this because of the fact that they paid for expedited shipping, so some people in the US have received an early copy. I'll say this is a review copy that was given to me, and backers, you will be receiving it shortly. So what is Weather Machine? Well, in Weather Machine, you're going to play one of Professor Lativ's scientists. You see, Professor Lativ has invented this weather machine where he can control local weather, eradicate floods, maybe bring sunshine out to help the crops, etc. But it has a nasty knock-on effect. You see, it creates a butterfly effect in creating weather calamities around the world. So as one of his scientists, what you've got to do is try to create a new prototype which will combat what's happening with these butterfly effects around the world in terms of extreme weather. And also the government is involved as well. And the government wants to run their own kind of machine also. So you're going to be helping the government out. They want a piece of the pie. Whilst helping the professor conduct his experiments to influence localized weather, but also trying to create these prototypes which stop these butterfly effects happening. You know, if you get to do your own research in your own lab, you get to build the prototype, and eventually you're going to get given some awards. And then if you get 3 awards, what's going to happen is you're going to get given the Nobel Peace Prize. And look at this. This is a wonderful metal Nobel Peace Prize. That's one of the triggers, one of the end game conditions there on that Nobel Peace Prize. Now, in the solo game, you're going to be playing against the saboteurs, and what they're going to do is they're going to come in and they're going to try and stop your experiments, basically. So they're going to rack up kind of their points, and the aim of your game as a solo game is to try and beat their points, but that's only one of the conditions. There are another 2 conditions, and to successfully beat the solo game, you have to beat all 3 conditions, and we'll talk about what those are in a second. Now I've already done an unboxing of Weather Machine, so you can check that out on my channel, and as you can see, the artwork is utterly stunning. It's possibly the best looking Lacerda that there is. I think Ian O'Toole has gone over and above in his artwork here, this kind of steampunk effect that you can see. The components are absolutely fantastic. You get loads of little kind of wooden robots that you get to put on the government spaces, or maybe put on the weather machine itself, or as you're combating the weather. There's these wonderful kind of chemicals here as well, and the player meeples are utterly divine. And as I say, I've got these metal machine parts as well. The game will come with cardboard machine parts. I really like the metal machine parts. Totally unnecessary, obviously, as an addition. But again, pretty much like the metal cars in Kanban EV, they make it totally worthwhile. And there are also these fantastic kind of research tokens that you get, which are in the shape of books, but they're nice wooden tokens. So component-wise, artwork-wise, it looks absolutely stunning. But it's a complex game to learn, and I want to caveat that right now. I was fortunate enough to play a 4-player game of this about a year ago at GridCon, taught to me by the excellent Scott Hill. So when I got the game, I jumped straight into the solo game. I would recommend that if you're a solo gamer, that you're going to play a few rounds, two-handed at the very minimum, a few rounds to get used to the mechanisms, and we'll talk about those mechanisms at the back end of the video, because it is a complex game to learn, but the joy comes out of kind of seeing how your your planning and your strategizing is starting to come into shape. And certainly as the latter game comes on, you've got this thing where your points will start to rack up, etc. So without much further ado, what I'll do is I'll give you an overview of the solo mode, which is designed by David Turczi. And as I say, it's not going to be an in-depth rules explanation, and do forgive if I make any minor rules quibbles in this. I'm kind of 3.5 games into Weather Machine and still having to reference the rulebook a fair bit. So without much further ado, let me show you the board, what everything is, and I'll give you an overview on how the solo game works. So here we can see the entire board set out for the setup of the solo game, and you set it up almost exactly the same as the two-player game. The only difference being is in the two-player game, it asks you to block the rightmost space in all of the main locations, and those are 2, 3, and 4. You can see the numbers on there. In the solo game, you don't block those off because you're going to play against 2 saboteurs. So let's talk about the locations. The locations are all numbered. You have 1 and 5 are not the main locations, and 2, 3, and 4 are the main locations. Location number 1 is the supply location. This is where you're going to spend your supply vouchers that you'll rack up on your board over here to get new items. Maybe you want some chemicals, maybe you want to change the initiative, maybe you want a bot, maybe you want one of these tiles to extend your laboratory. That's what happens in location number 1. Location number 2 over here is the government location, and this is where you're going to help build the government machine. So you're going to give machine parts, and you're going to get research tokens, and you maybe get some of these tiles here which allow you to activate stuff at the beginning of your turn. And when you complete a government branch of this, then the government machine is going to run, and you're going to get one of these government tokens, which is one of these here, these government markers. Place them on the weather, and I'll explain how that works in a sec. And also you're going to get the bonuses whenever you activate one of these on one of the actions, should I say. Whenever you activate one of these, you're going to get the bonuses on the column and the row that they're in. At the top of each of the main locations, there's also a funding track as well, and you will instigate funding at various points in the game, and that will give you some bonuses. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit later. Location number 3 is the weather machine itself, and again you're going to put robots up here, and they're going to run the weather machine. And when the weather machine runs, what happens is it will do something, gives you the ability to earn points and maybe other bonuses, but also it's going to cause a knock-on effect for the butterfly effect, if you like, for other weather. So that makes this a little bit more difficult. And over here we have the research and development arm of it, and this is where you're monitoring what's happening to the weather. You all start off with level 1 extreme weather, but there's level 2 and level 3 tiles are there, and the more that this machine runs, the more these extreme tiles come into play. And what you don't want is a level 3 extreme tile, because if you go through that and then you've got to do more, I think that triggers a game end condition. But you can put your robots on here and your chemicals on here, and then when you got that and you publish a paper, what that allows you to do is then put one of your markers on one of these experiments, which is good because that means you can knock that experiment back and delay that happening even further. Now the final location, location 5, is where income is scored. So when Lativ moves on to location number 5, when you remove robots from your board down here, it reveals like a bonus space next to it. You get to get that bonus. So you get it when you get the robot, and also when Lativ goes on to income as well. So let's talk about your player board down here. So I'll just move this over. Down here, over on the left hand side, you can see there's 4 rows of robots. These robots in the top here, you can take literally from the beginning, as long as you can pay the resource, which happens to be a supply token, a supply voucher. And when you take the robot, you're going to store it on your board, and you will look down here on your laboratory. You can see that you've got various spaces on here. I'll talk about how that works. So you take a robot and you store it on your board, and then you get the bonus there, and you'd also get that bonus if Lativ moves into the income onto his office as well. Now these down here, you can only take these robots on this left hand side at the bottom if you've got 6 robots, or down here if you've got 9 robots. So they're more restricted, but the rewards are greater. Here is where you're going to track your vouchers. You're going to collect vouchers throughout the game, which you then get to spend to do certain actions. And if you go back up to these actions, you can see that the left action is going to be 1 government voucher there, and the right action is going to be 2. government vouchers. There is one science voucher, sorry, not science voucher. There is one laboratory voucher, and that one is 2 vouchers. That's one R&D voucher. That is 2 R&D vouchers. The other voucher is these science vouchers here. And science vouchers you can spend in lieu of any other vouchers, so they become very, very useful. Down at the bottom of the board, you're going to randomly select some gold tiles, and these are these here. Now, there are a number that you will have to take out of the game for the solo game, which are, if you have, you score points basically if you have more of a particular tile, but that doesn't work in the solo game. So you take those out and then you randomly select 2 tiles, 2 gold tiles. Throughout the game, you're going to get these, the ability to get some of these investment tiles. They will go next to your board. I'll just move that across. They will go next to your board, just there. And at the beginning of your turn, you can spend one of those vouchers to effectively move one of your gold tiles up into the relevant coloured area. So when you do that, say we're choosing this, which means I would have to have 5 robots in a government action, I'd place it on there and I would get whatever reward is under there. So that's how those goals work, and of course they rack up your points at the end of the game. There's another function which I'll talk about in a second. Here you have the where you're going to put your research tokens when you get them. So certain actions on here are going to allow you to get research tokens. You're going to put them in a relevant spot, and once you've got 3 of the same type across there, 2 and a citation, or 2 and an award, which is these here, and you get those throughout the game, I'll explain. Then you get to slide that your token over there. That means you published a paper. You get whatever reward is there, and then what happens is you can then use that to put on one of these up here. Now you can only ever have one of your tokens on these extreme weather tiles up here, and they only get cleared back if all of them are covered. So how do you cover them if you're going to have one of your tokens? Well, that's where running the government machine comes in very, very handy, because of course if the government machine runs, you get to put that on there, and therefore you can knock those back. So yeah, it becomes a game of kind of obviously trying to optimize and maximize your turns. And each of these, obviously these vouchers here, these research tokens here, I say you can only have one of the same type going across here. Means that you're kind of you're having to plan which ones you need to get. So maybe you get the rain one from there. That still means you've got to get the rain one from the government and the rain one from the R&D as well to get that, to complete that, to move that across. Final thing to say is, as I say, you've got your own laboratory here, and you start off with 1 tile, and you're going to expand this as the game goes on. Now, if you look here, you can see this kind of circular thing here. That means that you can put a machine part on there. But on these here, on that one, shows kind of the outline of a robot. You can put a robot on there. That one's just got a blank circle in. That means you can put a chemical on there. Throughout the game, you're going to either put machine parts or robots on here, which you'll be using at some point in the game. But also, you're going to want to store additional chemicals. So say, for example, you've got a green one there because that's got no colour on it. If I look here and I get the next tile that's available on here, so let's say this tile here, I can put that anywhere in my laboratory. Okay, so I could put that there, and that would give me space to put, say, another machine part on there or another robot on there, because the order that they're in, and you can adjust them at any point, really important when it comes to running this particular, when it comes to running the R&D part of the machine there. But the other interesting thing as well is that they also have these semicircles, which when combined, a complete circle. That means I can put a chemical of that colour on there. So you get this spatial puzzle element of it as well, where you're trying to maximise and optimise what you can do to get those, get those parts and those machine parts and those chemicals that you need to make sure that the game is working. Now, it's a Lacerda game. It also has executive actions, and what you can do is you can spend here a supply token to alter the initiative, because that dictates who goes first. You can spend the relevant number of supply tokens to get a bot from there, and you can spend a supply token to get a lab extension tile, as mentioned earlier. So those are the executive actions that you can carry out. And the game itself takes place over an undetermined number of rounds. But however, throughout the game, what you're going to do is there are 3 phases effectively per round. First of all, it's your player turns. In player order, everybody's going to take a turn. So obviously, starting off, you're going to be first. You're going to take your meeple and you're going to place them on one of these action spaces here. Now, in the first round, you can't use the far left action space. That far left action space gives you the ability to do both actions. It's got a little and on there. It gives you the ability to do both actions at that particular, wherever you put it. So if I put that there outside the first round, that would mean I could do both actions as long as I've got enough lab tokens available or lab vouchers available here. However, the next 2 mean that you can do either or of those. And you're going to have to plan that, because wherever you are, wherever you place your guy, so let's say one of the saboteurs is there and I move my guy there, I'm going to get, first of all, a research token. So although it's on the lab space, it's going to give me a research voucher. And then I'm also going to get a research voucher for every other player that's to my left as well. So every other meeple that's to my left as well. So if I go there, there's a good chance I could get 2 research tokens. However, if Lativ is also on that space, I'm also going to get a science token. And remember, science tokens can be spent for any other voucher. When you do move on to the same space that Lativ is, what's going to happen is he's going to move on to the very next one in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And of course, that then gets him round to number 5, where the income phase is going to run there. So that's kind of how your turns work. And as I say, on the first turn, what's going to happen is you're not going to be able to play the one on the far left, but at subsequent turns, you're going to be able to do that. So the key thing to remember when you go on any of these tracks is to read all the icons from left to right, because as you go on there and you pay your lab token, it gives you the ability to move 1 up on the funding track. That's really important. It's really easy to overlook that particular part of it. So make sure that you're moving them from left to right. Now up here as well, you have Lativ's assistant here, okay, which is this bot, and he's going to move almost every turn basically, and he's going to start putting bots on there. If he's already got a bot on there, you have the ability to take it off. When these columns are full, the weather machine will run. That will then trigger something happening as well then. And that's going to move through every turn. And wherever he is known as the active column basically. So kind of that's how that works. Now let's talk about these funding tracks, because as you move up the funding tracks, first of all, at the top of each funding track, there's a victory point on there. At the end of the game, wherever your token is, whichever it is, either below or left of his, to the right of, should I say, is what points you're going to get. So if I was on that particular one there, the maximum points, victory points from that funding track is going to be 2 just up there. But also, when you activate your investment tokens, you can get for funding for them. And what you can do for funding is you will then say where you are on this government track. Say I'm there. You would then on the government track get the bonus of everything underneath where you are and to the left. The same on the R&D track up there. This one, the lab track, works slightly different basically. So on the lab track, you get to choose 1 of any bonus under there, but it's got some little plus numbers on there. You then choose any other track and you assume that you are either 1 further on, 2 further on, 3 further on, or 4 further on than where it is, and get the relevant bonuses for that. So working on those funding tracks and activating your funding by using the investment token is really, really important. So the game will play and you will go through the entire game trying to maximize your points, building up your points all along. The solo AIs start on 35 points, and then throughout the game that is going to increase based on what they do and where they are and what the actions are going to be taken, etc. And at the end of the game, you have to, one of the winning conditions is that you have to beat their score. Automatically at the end of the game, they're going to jump up by another 30. So you've got to make sure that your final scoring gives you enough to kind of take you over the line. That's only one of the winning conditions. So there we go. In a nutshell, that's kind of an overview of how it plays. As I say, I'm not going to go into any in-depth in kind of individual gameplay because it's pretty complex to play, and I would be here for a long, long time. So let's talk about the solo AI then. So just before we talk about how you can win and lose the game, I think I mentioned previously that if you flip an investment tile, it allows you to move up on the funding tracks. No, an investment tile actually allows you to put a gold tile on there, which is, let's say this red one's going to go on here, there, as you can see, so gold tile, so it becomes active. But an investment tile also allows you to flip that over to the other side. The gold is still active, but that allows you to then move up on the funding tracks up at the top of the board. So, how do you then win or lose the game? So, the game can end in three ways, and as a solo gamer, you've got to achieve all of these three here. So the first things that you have to do to win the game is your points have to be higher than the target value of the AI. They start on 35. That's going to progressively move up throughout the game. At the end of the game, they're automatically going to get another 30 points. You have to complete that as one of the goals. Just doing that on its own isn't enough. You also currently have to have 4 of your gold tiles which are on the board and the conditions they're met, which is very difficult, and at least 2 of your funding markers are beyond the 5th space. So you imagine where you start is a 0 space, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At least 2 of your funding markers have got to be on there. If you've done all those, great, you beat the game. There's a kind of scoring mechanism at the end of the game. So that is one way that you win the game, is that all that happens, you achieve that, that's it, you win immediately. If all of the government steps in, and this is a game-ending condition, if you gain the Nobel Prize, and that's this here. So throughout the game, you're going to get some of these award tokens when you successfully publish papers, etc. If you get 3 of those, what's going to happen is you're going to get the Nobel Peace Prize, which is great. It's a game-end condition, so you've got to time getting those because you can actually end the game too soon. The last experiments tile is placed in the display, so you're going to cycle through these almost every turn, not every turn when Latti's assistant moves, and if there's no more experiment tiles, then that's it, that triggers the end of the game. The government machine is completed, so all of the branches up here of the government machine, they're all completed, and there's no more tiles up there. Or all the spaces in the R&D section are completed. So that's these over here where you can put bots and machine parts. So that will end the game as well. If it happens, play more and more around as usual, then proceed to final scoring. The other way is if the AI completes their nefarious plans. And this happens if at the end of the turn there are 2 or more level 3 extreme weather tiles on the board. So at the top of the board, if you remember, there's large extreme weather tiles. They're going to get moved onto the board. You start out with level 1, level 2 and level 3. If there's 2 or more level 3s, that's it. They've successfully thwarted your plans. Or if at the beginning of their turn, all of the security report cards are in the discard pile. If there's no more cards to go through, you don't shuffle the discard pile, that's it, that triggers end of game for you. So that's kind of an overview of the game. That's how you can win or lose the game. Let's talk about the solo AI. So to finalize setting up the solo AI, I got my figures starting already in the supply space. Both their figures are here. They've got all their bots there, and you've randomly chosen 2 chemicals. At the beginning of the game, it doesn't really matter which 2 chemicals you've chosen, so I've got a green and a blue there. First thing we're going to do to set them up is we're going to use these security report cards. I'm going to flip them over, and we're going to see if it's got which picture of the meeple, which saboteur it is, and whether it's a main action. Remember, main actions are 2, 3 and 4. Now remember, we can't use the left spaces on the first round. So here, the white one is going to move to the lab. So they're going to go into the middle lab there. That's going to get into the discard pile. And then we flip the next. And what we're looking for now is a pink meeple on a main action space. So first one we take over is the pink meeple going to the supply location. That's not a main board. Keep that one to there. Here we go. Next one is a pink meeple going to the government supply space. We'll put him on the middle there, and that's where they start. Both those go into the discard, and then we shuffle this security cards, and they're going to go to the left, and we reveal the top one, and that tells me that the white meeple is going to move on to the lab space next turn. It's already on the lab space, so I know he's going to move over to the R&D space on his next turn, or on their next turn, should I say. Right, at the beginning of your go, what you get to, on the first round only, what you get to do is a supply action run, basically. And this allows you to spend your vouchers to get stuff from the board to start populating here. So for example, you can say you can change the initiative. I'm already first. I can buy a robot, I can get a tile from here, or I can get a chemical, basically. So These here all cost 1 supply voucher. These actions here. These are for these bots on the left. These bots on the right cost 2 supply vouchers, and you automatically get the bonus that's next to them. So I'm going to actually spend 2, and I'm going to take this one here and put this on my board. Oh, that should already be on 2. I'll put that in a space just there, and that gives me a science bonus. So I'm down 2 already. I potentially need a chemical as well. I can get chemicals here cost 1. Chemicals in these columns here cost 2. Chemicals in this column cost 3. I'm going to get a white chemical, I think, and that'll cost me 1. There we go. And I'm going to put that into my space. And bear in mind that hasn't got a colour, so I'm there. So I've already kind of stocked up a little bit. So now it's going to go to my turn, and then it's going to go to the AI's turn. So we'll just run through one of my turns, and then we'll go on to how the AI works. So on my turn, I get to take my first action, which means moving my meeple to any of these. Now, bear in mind, all I can use is the space which allows me to carry out 1 action on my first go. So, government there. I don't have any machine parts, I can't run that action. That's going to require 2 government tokens. I've only got 1, but I could use a science token to actually carry out that action. That allows me to place a robot on the weather machine, so if the column is full, when the assistant gets back around to there, the weather machine will run. That allows me to publish a paper, but I need 3 of those in there, so that action can't happen. Over on R&D, I can place a robot, put a chemical on the right one, and then I can take one of these research tokens here. Yeah, okay. Also on the bottom row of this here, there's an additional cost to pay on there as well. So that allows me to take a research token there, or that one, if I've got a published paper, it allows me to then take an award token. So there's some of them that I can't do. I certainly can't do that one. I can't do this one, and I can't do that one. I could do that. Let's go for a lab one. And now here's the good thing, right? Okay, on the lab, so I'm going to take mine here and I'm going to put that there. First of all, I'm going to get an R&D voucher, so that moves that up 1. But because there's somebody to the left of me as well, I'm going to get a second R&D voucher as well. So you can see it's starting to kind of rack up there. Now the one I'm going to do is obviously this one here. So it's going to cost me a lab voucher, which is good. My lab voucher is done. I'm going to move one up on the funding track. So move my little token up on the funding track just there. And I'm going to take my robot on a place where I've got a chemical. So here we go. I'm going to place this up here. My chemical then goes back to the supply just there. And what this means is this one's actually full. So when this assistant comes around to there, the weather machine is going to run just there. And when that runs, I get to take a research token, I think from the bottom of it. Yeah. So I'm geared up for already taking one of these wind research tokens. That is in essence my first go done there. So let's talk about how the AI works. So now we come to the AI's turn, or the saboteur's turn. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look on this card. We're going to use the top part of this card. This is the current security report, and this is the previous security report. Generally, you're going to use the top of the current security report to find out where they're going to move, and then the bottom of the previous security report in terms of their priorities, and I'll explain that in a second. So it says here that the white saboteur is going to move to the lab space, already in the lab space. So you're moving to the next one on. Remember, we can't use that left one just yet. And that means he's going to move into the R&D space. So let's tell you what happens in the R&D space for this person. So because he can only take 1 action, we're going to revert to the board here. So we've moved them along. There's no other Lativ isn't there. There's nobody else there. So the points don't increase. Or if there was anybody else to the left, then the points would go up. This first action is if he could take both. If he can take both, he does top then bottom. And that would allow him to effectively place a robot on there and take a research token. Can't do that because he's only in the either space there, not the and space. So when we move down onto here, and it says, right, first of all, we're going to use the priority on the previous security report. And this priority kind of dictates what is going to be classed as the active branch. So we look here, and it says that the active branch is going to be... here we go. It's going to be frost, basically. So if they've got a chemical of frost that's in there, then they can place a bot on there. And they do. They have a blue chemical. There's one up at the top of frost there. It's a blue one. If they didn't, then you'd go around in the order it says on here. So from left to right and circling back round until you could find one where they had a chemical and they could place it. So here we go, it says on frost, and it's going to choose the topmost one because on some of them there are multiple colours. Fortunately there's only one on frost, so that dictates frost there, and that dictates the priority or up or down on the previous weather report. So I'm going to take one of their bots and we're going to put that up there. I'm going to take the blue chemical, because we have that, and we're going to put that next to it. So he's starting to stack up on those, and he may well get the ability to kind of score on those a little bit later. But because he's done that, he's going to take this research token here, okay, and he's going to place that in his hideout. I think I should have taken a research token, a random research token at the beginning anyway for him, but he's got that in his hideout. Now, we've done the actions on here, we've had a look, and we come to the end of the bot's turn. And it says here, if we look at the bot's turn, if they've got 2, what they can do is they can effectively unlock one of these spaces on here. If they've got 3, sorry, here we go, they can unlock a space on here and they get to kind of do something on the weather machine itself. But he's only got 1 on there so far, and there's only 1 token here. When they start to rack up throughout the game, that means they're, first of all, they're taking these tokens from you, which stop you getting them, which stop you having the ability to run your weather machine, but also kind of scuppers your plans a little bit there. So that's kind of the end of the first round, if you like. Now, when it goes back to me, because I'm there, Latif doesn't move, should I say. Next thing's going to happen is the Latif's assistant is going to move on the board. No, he's not. He's going to go back to where he was, because the next thing, so that's the player's turns done. The next thing is to run the weather machine. Now, if all of these columns were filled with robots here, we would run the weather machine, but it's not. So we're not running the weather machine. So if the weather machine doesn't run, all players with bots in the active branch may choose to return them to their workshop. If you do not have a space for a bot, return it to any space in your assembly line. And you can return any of Latif's bots on the active branch to the side of the lab. So there we go. So that's the active branch. That's going to go there. So that's the end of that. So that's phase B done. And then phase C would be the end of the round. We would adjust the turn order. That doesn't really happen, obviously, because there's no turn order here. So that doesn't happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to move that bot to the next one there and place another one, if we've got one, of Latif bots on the active branch. Suddenly there are 2 bots on there now. And then we would go again. I would go first, then the saboteurs would go first. And as you can see, if you look at these saboteur cards, literally it's just about taking you to, telling you which action space they move to, and then obviously the previous card is what you would use for their priorities. And that's possibly the hardest part of this, is just getting used to the priorities. Now, because the bots work, because the saboteurs work very differently to how you play the game, there is a saboteurs rulebook which dictates fully all of the available actions, but it's also noted on here as well, and there's a priority board there as well. It's also noted on here as well, but as you can see, it's very, very icon heavy at the same time. There's things for if they run their nefarious plans, and that's whether they've got enough of these tokens, etc. But yeah, it's icon heavy, and you will find out in your early games that you keep referring back to that saboteurs rulebook. Even though these help, even after the kind of three and a half games, I still have to refer back to the rulebook just to make sure I'm getting it right. The game will then continue, round after round after round. You're racking up your moves on there. Their points are starting to escalate around the board. The weather's getting worse. You've got these extreme tiles coming at the top. You're trying to work the government machine. You're trying to run the weather machine, get bots on there. You're trying to make sure you've got enough vouchers to get your robots, to get your machine parts, etc. And all the while, you know, things are starting to escalate and get pretty badly out of shape as the game comes towards its final phases. At the end of your game, you will then, whichever game end condition is triggered, whether you lose the game, which you can do under the solo game, or whether you get right to the end of the game, you're then going to tot up your points and find out who is the winner. And that, in a nutshell, is how you play the solo of Weather Machine from Vital Lacerda, with a solo designed by David Turczi. And there we go. That's a really brief rundown of how the solo AI works in, or the saboteurs work in Weather Machine by Vital Lacerda. Obviously the solo designed by David Turczi. Now, first of all, I just want to, if there were any minor rules mistakes there, I do want to apologise to say it's not an instructional video. It's just a video to give you a brief overview on how the Solo AI works. It's so kind of my thoughts on Weather Machine. I think first of all, it's one of Vital Lacerda's most complex games. Once you start to get used to how it works, the mechanisms start to interconnect really nicely. But getting used to it is difficult. It's not an entry-level Vital Lacerda game, that's for sure. I'd say on a complexity level, it probably ranks up there with the base game version of On Mars in terms of Solo AI in there. Now, On Mars in the base game, the Solo AI wasn't the best in that because it left too much up to interpretation. Here, David Turczi, what he's done is designed something of a complexity level that a game this complex deserves. And I think when you have a complex game like Weather Machine, you don't want a simple AI to be run. You want to have an AI that actually mimics what other players may do. It doesn't totally mimic it, of course, because obviously in a multiplayer game, you've got an idea of what your opponents are going to do. Here, you have an idea of what your opponents are going to do next, but not necessarily what their overall strategy is, because their overall strategy is obviously to try and thwart your plans here. From a rules perspective, as going back to the rules on this, as I say, it is a very rules-intensive game, and it's going to take you a while to parse everything, to get everything correct in the rules, and you're going to make mistakes in your early games, and I know I did in my first game. I had to reset it twice in my first game. I jumped straight into the Solo because I got a slight advantage as I played an early version of this about a year or so ago at GridCon, Paul Grogan's gathering, which was, taught to me by the excellent Scott Hill. So I already had an indication on how the game works, so I jumped straight into the Solo game. Now I play Lacerda's Solo a lot, and again, I'm coming at that slightly advantageous. I think as a solo gamer, your best bet is to play at least a few rounds two-handed. Do not try to jump straight into the solo game because you're trying to manage the rules of the game and you're trying to manage the rules of the solo AI, which work very differently to how you work as well. And you'll find that your game is interrupted by a lot of rules referencing as you get the mechanisms down and try to get the solo AI mechanisms down. So complexity-wise, it really is very high up there. I love a crunchy Lacerda game, and that's why I played this, kind of 3.5 times so far. I think it's got exactly the right level of crunch from what I want when I want a deep and complex Lacerda game. So in terms of kind of the overall game itself, you've got to think about how this fits in with the rest of the Lacerdas and why it may be a little bit more difficult to actually understand how it flows. And I think that comes down to the fact that a lot of Lacerdas are grounded in somewhat reality. You know, you think about Kanban EV, you may not understand anything about making cars, but it's pretty easy to grok that process of making cars in Kanban EV. Same with Vinyos and wine. This is a little bit more abstract. And because it's more abstract, kind of getting your head around and parsing all of the information and what mechanisms interlock with other mechanisms can be a little bit daunting. And I think that may be a reason that some players might find this theme not totally for them. I think it's great. I think once you start playing the game, it all makes sense. But you've got to understand that you're playing a slightly abstracted game here. I suppose, you know, all gaming is abstracted to one end of the spectrum or another. But it's an abstracted game because none of these mechanisms here you're going to be totally familiar with, or not the mechanisms, none of the structures, if you like, of the game or the themes of the game, you're going to be totally familiar with. So you've got to kind of try and parse that information and get used to it. So there are some barriers to entry with Weather Machine in the fact that its complexity scale is right at the top of Lacerda's, I think, from what's out there. And thematically, you've got to understand what you're trying to achieve to make this work for you. Once you start to get that, it starts to flow, but you're still going to spend a good 90 minutes on a solo game. Even when you got the rules down, you're going to spend a good 90 to 120 minutes on a solo game, so it's going to take up a fair bit of your time and a fair bit of your brain space as well. So if you're anything like me, I might set it up, play it for 30 or 40 minutes, go away, do something else, come back to the table, and then have another session, then go away and come back to the table. And that's kind of how I find this Lacerda's worked for me, and certainly how this Lacerda's worked for me. I've not sat down and played a 2-hour session all the way through. I've played it over a number of sessions in a particular day. So yeah, we've got the complexity level, we've got the theme, which may not work for you, but other than that, it's hard to actually figure out, anything bad about Weather Machine. If you like Lacerdas, this is almost peak Lacerda for you. It's got that, as I say, that really good crunchy level of complexity that if you like a game that makes you think and makes you strategize, then that is excellent. The solo AI does start to move very, very quickly. They don't hold up your rounds. Once you get used to those actions, either using that solo AI board with all the icons on there, and referring back to the rule book, or just referring back to the rule book, you'll start to understand what happens, and it doesn't really hold up your game. You've got the priority system on there, working out what's an active branch, what defines the next active branch, etc. That takes a little bit of getting used to as well, but again, it's not insurmountable in that respect. Components wise, this is off the charts. It's utterly probably the best looking game that I own. I think everything from the quality of the wooden meeples and the quality of all the tiles and the artwork on there from Ian O'Toole, it's absolutely stunning. It's impressive. My wife walked into where I've got this set up and she was like, wow, that's amazing. And she looked at the board, she said, I have that on the wall. And I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's absolutely, a stunning achievement in terms of artwork and components. Price-wise, this is another thing for you as well, is that Lacerda games aren't cheap, so if you are... if you know Lacerda games and you are a collector of Lacerda games, then it's a worthwhile addition to your arsenal. I say I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as anybody's first Lacerda game. It's got those key Lacerda mechanisms of action selection in here, optimization, an element of resource management. They're all here and they all interlink beautifully. So if you know Lacerda games, you'll get it. But if you're looking for an entry-level Lacerda game, Weather Machine isn't it. I would say Weather Machine is a Lacerda game for Lacerda fans, and that's what's beautiful about it. If you opted for these for these metal cogs, you're in for a treat. Completely unnecessary. You don't need them at all. You get cardboard ones in the box, but they are such a joy to play with and place on the board. You have to get used to the colours. Fortunately, they're all slightly different shapes inside, so if you have issues recognizing colors, then at least they're all different shapes in size, and you can kind of recognize them from there. But yeah, they are utterly joyous. So this will be a question that people ask me, where does this rank in your Lacerdas? Now, as you know, Luke, Hector and I did a video on Lacerda solos about a year or so ago. And at the top of my solos for Lacerdas was Kanban EV, which again was designed with David Turczi. I love this partnership, by the way. The Turczi-Lacerda partnership just absolutely bloody works. I'm really hoping it carries through to Inventions, which is the next Vital Lacerda game. So where does it rank? Well, it's certainly at the top tier Lacerda for me. I think at the moment, Kanban EV still has the edge on it. Again, Kanban EV looks great on the table. The solo is a little bit easier to work in Kanban EV. It's still a complex game. Solo is a little bit easier to work in Kanban EV. So at the moment, this falls just below Kanban EV for me, but it provides a markedly different experience. Now, after multiple plays, maybe it'll rise in the ranks, maybe it'll drop down in the ranks. At the moment, I think the Weather Machine is peak Lacerda. It's an excellent addition to Vital Lacerda games. I think the solo works so very well in providing you with a real opponent to play against. You don't feel like you're playing the game, if you like. You feel like you've got these saboteurs working against you, and I think that's really vitally important in a game like this. So yeah, at the moment it's ranking just below Kanban EV for me. That could change over multiple plays. It could usurp Kanban EV, but as you know, Kanban EV was my solo game of the year last year. I'm not saying Weather Machine is going to be my solo game of the year this year, but it's certainly going to be in my top 10 solo games that I've experienced this year. So Weather Machine for me as a solo game is an absolute triumph. If you like Lacerdas, if you like your Lacerdas crunchy, if you're looking for the peak Lacerda experience, then Weather Machine is really going to hit that spot for you. If you have issues with kind of understanding complex rule sets, if you have issues with understanding a relatively complex solo AI, if you have issues with abilities of thought, of kind of parsing a slightly abstract theme, something that's not grounded in reality, then Weather Machine may not be for you. But for me, I think it's an absolute triumph as a game. So, thank you very much for joining me on this journey through Weather Machine by Vital Lacerda, published by Eagle-Gryphon Games, artwork by Ian O'Toole, with the solo mode by David Turczi. It's an absolute triumph. I absolutely think this game is going to have a prize place in my collection, and a lot of Lacerda fans are going to be very, very happy with this. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, check out our other videos, and one final thought. If you can't find anyone else to play with, there's nothing wrong with playing with yourselves. Until next time, bye-bye.